I'm delighted to take our Lightroom and time-lapse photography skills even further. This week, I want to show you how to make a movie clip that feeds into clip with audio using Lightroom and Adobe Photoshop CC. So here I am in Lightroom. And in Lightroom, what I have here are a sequence of Aurora Borealis, Northern Lights photos. I teach a Northern Lights photography workshop. It's one of the highlights of my year. So this is an Aurora. And what I want to show you is this is one frame, and then the next frame, and then the next frame, and the next frame, on and on and on. It's a sequence of frames in which the Aurora moves and the stars move, but the shutter speed stays constant, the aperture, the ISO, nothing else changes. So what I've done is I've taken the first of this sequence. These are all raw files. They're all from a Canon 5D Mark III, traditional camera in standard still photographic mode, not video. So I've taken the first photo, I've gone to Lightroom's Develop module, and I've made it look like this. It went from this was the straight out of the camera, to this. Now I need to point out one more thing in here. Let me just hide this panel away. I need to point out that I have cropped this photo, and I have cropped it using a specific ratio. I've cropped it using 16:9, because as we talked about last week, that's the proportions, the ratio of video. Now that's different than the ratio that my camera shoots. My camera shoots a 2:3 ratio, but video works in a 16:9 ratio. So I've had to do some cropping, and that's kind of heartbreaking because there's more sky here, and I wish I could include it. But having done all the work to go from what you see on the left to what you see on the right, there's no reason why I need to do this one by one by one. What fixed the first frame will work on all these other frames. So what I can do in Lightroom is I can go Edit, Select All. I can pick all of them. I come down here and go Sync Settings. Now it's very important that we notice which one, the one I have worked on, the one I've improved, is the most highlighted, because it's going to synchronize from the active, the most highlighted. It's going to synchronize from this file over to all the others. So in this case, I'm going to tell it I want to synchronize everything, and I'll hit Synchronize. Now, just like that, that's the same as copy and paste. There are a number of ways to do this in Lightroom, and that's what I've been exploring in our past couple of video tutorials. But what you're going to see now is that these photos begin to all look like the first one. And Lightroom's going to start filling in the grid by copying and pasting these settings from first frame onto last frame. Now, in this case, there are 215 frames, so this might take a few minutes. Well, I'm going to pause here while it synchronizes these adjustments all the way across. Okay, we're back. So now you can see that Lightroom has taken the settings from this file and it has synchronized it to this one and this one and this one all the way across. They now all have the same look because they have the same developed settings. The same formula goes all the way through. So these are my raw files. Now, unfortunately, Lightroom can't tie the raw files together and make our time-lapse video internally. So as I showed last week, we're going to have to export a copy of these. We're going to have to make a JPEG copy. Well, for this, I like to use a template. Now, last week, I built this template, a 1280 by 720 template. But this week, since we're going to work with Photoshop, I figure we might as well kick it up a notch. Let's go for the highest quality time-lapse that we're likely to ever use. Now, most of the settings are going to stay the same. So I'm going to have it put the files. I'll have it put it in a folder called 1920 by 1080 sequence JPEG. I'm going to say 1920 by 1080. The file naming is still sequential. And this is a template I built last week that gives a 4-digit sequence number, number 1, number 2, number 3, to the JPEG copy of these files. I don't need to redo that. I just need to use the sequence number. So I don't need to change much, just what folder they go to. I don't need to change how they're named. This will not create a video, so the settings in here make no difference. For the type of file, I think JPEG, sRGB, at about a 70 to 80 quality will be just fine. Again, you don't have to compress the JPEG, but it might make a bigger file and it'll be slower to render. But in the image sizing for this week, let's go with the biggest size. So we'll go 1920 by 1080. What we're making here is a 1080p video. The sharpening is fine, metadata is fine, there's nothing else I need to change in here. So let me just add this in as a new template. I'll call this 1920 by 1080 sequenced JPEGs for time-lapse. All right, so now I have my template over here on the left. But if I used the template right now, it would only export one photo. Well, that wouldn't help me much. So I'm going to hit cancel out of the export dialog so that I can then go edit, select all. I can right click. I can come down to export, and I can export with my new 1920 by 1080 sequence JPEG template. So I'll pick that. Now Lightroom's going to have to cook a copy, a JPEG copy of all 200 of these raw files. That's going to take a little while. If you're doing hundreds or thousands of frames, this would be a good point to walk away, take a break, and come back tomorrow, in an hour, when the export is done. So I'm going to pause here again while Lightroom spits out a copy of all these raw files. And we're back. Now that took a bit of time. As you can tell, working with bulk raw files is going to be time consuming, but I hope it was pretty easy. All I did was synchronize and use my export template. Well here, let me quit out of Lightroom now. Here we are at the operating system level. Now last week, I used QuickTime Player Pro to tie together all the JPEGs that we just created. So here are the new JPEGs. Here's one, and then there's another, and then there's another. There's a whole folder full of them. I can show them to you this way if it helps. Thumbnail after thumbnail after thumbnail, or JPEG photo after JPEG after JPEG. But this week, instead of using QuickTime Pro, I'm going to use Photoshop CC. So what I'm going to do is go Window, Workspace, and I'm going to go with the one that says Motion, because something that most folks don't know about Photoshop is that it can actually work with video as well. So I'm going to go Window, Workspace, Motion. That's going to bring up the timeline down here at the bottom of the screen. It's going to change my panels around. Then I'm going to go in Photoshop, File, Open, plain old file open. And I'm going to guide it to my desktop. I'm going to guide it to that folder of sequenced JPEGs, and I'm just going to click on one of them. But I'm not going to hit open yet. Instead, I'm going to hit this little button that I bet has been there for a lot of you for years, but you never knew what to do with it. The one that says image sequence. So now when I hit open, Photoshop will give me the same type of dialog that QuickTime Pro asked. It will ask, how fast should I flip through these photos that are in the folder? Well, let's go with 24p, 24 frames per second. That's a pretty standard video rate. Just for review, the faster the frame rate, the smoother the appearance of dynamic motion, but the shorter your video. So I'm going to hit OK, and what we'll get is now this video on Photoshop's timeline. And if I come down here and hit this little play arrow on the timeline, you'll see it playing through the time-lapse sequence that we just created using Lightroom and Photoshop. Now that's pretty beautiful to me. That's the aurora doing its thing. It changes in brightness. It moves across the sky. The stars swirl. Beautiful. Now it may be choppy the first time you play it through or each time you play it through, but don't panic. Photoshop is just previewing what will happen when we save the video file. To save the video file, though, we can't just go File, Save. That would make a traditional Photoshop document, but not render video. To render video, we need to go Export, Render Video. Alternatively, that's what this little arrow right down here does for you. This is the Render Video arrow, or icon, I should say, in the Photoshop Motion workspace. Well, I'm just going to save this to my desktop, and I'll give it a name. I think I'll call this one Rainbow Aurora over trees, time-lapse clip. Okay, now down here, I'm going to go with H.264 for my video codec, high quality. All of this stuff I'm just going to leave alone. I'm going to trust Adobe to do it right. I'm going to hit render, and that's going to save this out as a video file. And this may take a little while. When we work with video, we need to be patient. So I'll let Photoshop save the video for me. There we go. When it's done, I could save this as a Photoshop document if I wanted, but I have no reason to. So I'll go close. I'm not going to save it. Let me just minimize this, because sitting out here on our desktop is now this file. And just to show, I'm going to go View, enter full screen. I'm going to go View, Actual Size. This is the size of a 1080p video. Apologies, 1080p. And when I hit play, ooh, that's beautiful. Let me get this off the screen. It's just gorgeous. That's the aurora and the stars swirling across the sky. I love it. Making this time-lapse clip was super easy, time-consuming, but easy using Lightroom and Photoshop CC. Now, are you ready to take this even further? Because something that most people don't know is that not only can we create video clips with Photoshop, but we can do some basic editing of those clips. I don't mean fancy stuff. If you want fancy, you want a program like Premiere from Adobe or After Effects, a non-linear video editor. But Photoshop alone is pretty powerful. So I'm going to hop back into Photoshop, and I'm going to use this button right here to add some media. What I'm going to add back in is that video that we just created. We created this one right here, the one that says Rainbow Aurora. So let me bring it in. And then down here, there's a little slider. It's hard to see, but this little guy, I'm going to reduce it so I can see the whole timeline. I think I'll then click the Add Media button again, because right now all we have is a clip, but I want an Aurora movie. So I'm going to grab another clip. I'm going to grab the one that we made last week. Let me just fast forward ahead. I'm going to grab this playhead. That's what this line here is. So you can see the other clip. This was last week's clip. And just for the doing of the thing, let's see. I might reverse their order by dragging today's past last week. So now we have this one, and then we have that one. And I might just add one more, I think, just because I can. I'm going to go Add Media. I built one in advance. This is one more clip. And again, just for the doing of the thing, maybe I'll wedge the new clip in between the others, something like that. So I can rearrange their order. Now, you may have to keep zooming out on the timeline, but let me just show you what would happen if I hit play now. First, I would see this video, and then I would see that video. Now, this is a longer clip of the aurora over what they call an Inukshuk, a stone man of the Arctic. And when it gets to the end of this clip, it'll start the next clip. Now we're putting together a movie versus a single clip. Well, I feel like the one in the middle, this Inukshuk aurora, goes a little long. So I might just go right here to the end of it and drag back a little to shorten it up. Something like this, just to make it a little shorter. That's what they call a rolling edit. Now, the next thing I might want to do is get a little fancy, because right now at the end of each clip, we get these abrupt breaks when it jumps from one sequence to the next sequence. So to get a little fancy, we can soften those transitions using Photoshop. So I'm going to position the playhead right about here, and I'm going to click this button. This one is the Add Transition. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag a crossfade there, and I think I'll do the same right here. Let me set another crossfade right about there. So same button. I'll go to this guy, and I'll go crossfade, drop it in, something like that. And now when I play it back, by the way, if you wanted to adjust the crossfade, when you grab it, you can change its duration. But I just went with 2 seconds. I think that will be plenty. So now let me drag this guy back so you can see what'll happen. Now we'll get this little dissolve effect of one into the other. Ooh, I'm loving this. And just to show it again, let's go back to our first clip, to this one. Now we get our fisheye aurora, and it dissolves into the Inukshuk aurora. We're getting much fancier here. Things are really happening. Just so you know, there are all sorts of cool effects, fading in, fading out, fading to black, available in this menu. Well, let's do one last. I want to add one more thing, I think, to the end of my video. I want to add a title slide that I had already made using nothing but the text tool in Photoshop. I think I'll add this guy onto the end. And it goes a little long as well. I think I only want it to last about this long. So I'll take the end of it right here and I'll drag it back just to shorten it up. Now, the reason I'm adding this title slide is I want folks to know that I made this video, but that the music I'm about to add, I didn't make. I licensed this music for public presentation from a company called triplescoopmusic.com. That's important because if you put videos up on Facebook, YouTube, Vimeo, etc., and you use other artists' music without the proper rights, you could get in a lot of trouble. And I don't care about the legal trouble as much as the idea that as an artist, as a photographer, I want people to respect my work, my copyright, my intellectual property, my creativity. So I feel like if I want folks to respect me, I need to be respectful of other artists. I'm not a musician, so I'd better get music that I can legally use if I post this to the web. Well, let's just add one more right here, just to soften it. Let's add that cross dissolve again. So again, I'll go and I'll get crossfade, and I'll drop it where I want the transition to go. And I think on this one, I'll go to the end because I don't want it to just abruptly stop. I think I want it to fade. I think I'll go with a 1 second fade right here, just a short fade to black, something like that. And I'll drop that right on the end there. So to show you what will happen now, or a preview of what will happen now, now we'll go from our Aurora clip into what I would call our outro and fade to black. I know it's all checkerboard right now, but trust me, this will become black, transparent. Well, the last one. I said I wanted music on this one. So I'm going to bring the playhead back to the beginning, and I'm going to click this button right here to add audio. And so what I'll do is I'll go to my desktop and I'll find the audio file that I licensed and downloaded. Now, the problem is this audio clip is much longer than my video. You can see how it extends way across the screen. So what I'm going to need to do is take this slider to zoom my timeline way out. I'm going to take my audio and I'm going to shorten it up so that it matches the duration of my video. Otherwise, the visuals would end and the audio would keep going. It would keep going on and on and on. So now, if I bring it to here, we won't hear the audio, but it'll end at the same time. And just to get even fancier, I'm going to tell this to fade in over a couple of seconds, about 2 seconds of fade in. I might just type the numbers in, and I might tell it to fade out over 2 seconds so that when I actually play this video, the audio ramps up gently and ramps out gently. Well, again, we've done a lot of designing here for our movie, but this won't play as a movie unless we render it. So I'm going to come down here. I'm going to click the little render icon again, and I'm going to save this on my desktop as, say, time-lapse. Let's call it Northern Lights time-lapse movie demo. And again, I'm going to stick to the H.264 high-quality presets. I'm going to just trust Adobe on all that. I'm going to hit render. Now, this render might take a bit longer. It might take a bit longer because it's actually rendering 3 separate clips with transitions and audio and that fade to black at the end all together. So let me pause here once more. I'll come back as soon as there's something to show you. Back. Now, if I thought that I was going to have to work on this video project again. If I didn't think that this was a one-time only, and given the amount of work we put into it, I think I'd probably work on it again. It's worth our time then to go File, Save, and to save our video project. So I'll call this, say, Northern Lights Time-lapse movie project as a Photoshop document, as a Photoshop file. So let me save my work. That didn't save the movie, but that saved my ability to come back in and mess with this again later if I need to. Well, now let me quit out of Photoshop. And out here on our desktop, here are the individual clips. But what I'm interested in is this one, this Northern Lights movie right here. So let me double click to open it up into QuickTime Player. Let me go View, enter full screen. Let me go View, actual size, so that we're seeing it as it really would be. And when I hit play, we ought to get our music. We ought to get our transitions. It ought to have beautiful, crisp stars that fade one clip into another, and then eventually fade to our outro, our title slide. The music fades away. It fades to black. I hit escape. I am just delighted. I hope you found this useful. I hope you'll make yourself a time lapse, and not just a clip, but a time lapse movie.